People given the capital punishment in Iran in 2024, 975 Norway-based Iran Human Rights and French group together against the death penalty said the figure was the highest since IHR began recording executions in Iran in 2008. This marks 17% increase from the 834 people recorded in 2023. The GDP growth rate in India as per Moody's Analytics 6.4%. Growth across Asia-Pacific economy will slow in 25 as trade tensions, policy shifts and uneven recoveries knock the region's fortunes. Number of criminals killed in Uttar Pradesh since 2017. 221 criminals were killed in encounters while 8,000 were injured targeting criminal attempts elements in various districts of Uttar Pradesh, said UP Finance Minister. Number of troops Keir Starmer plans to send to Ukraine 30,000. British Prime Minister said he is ready and willing to put UK troops on the ground in Ukraine as a security guarantee in event of some sort of ceasefire deal between Moscow and Kiev in exchange for American protection. Number of hostages still held captive by Hamas 66. Out of these, Israel has declared 30 to be dead. Is consumption enough to drive growth? And economy's growth depends on two factors. One is supply or production of goods and services, and the other is demand or expenditure for purchasing those goods and services. An economy's growth depends on two factors: supply or production of goods and services. One is supply or production of goods and services, other is demand or expenditure for purchasing these goods and services. Among the sources of demand, investment stand out for its ability to create multiplier effects. Consumption can only follow, not lead growth. An economy's growth is like sailing on two boats tugged into each other. One side is the supply or the production of goods and services. GDP is the value of production process is the value the production process adds. On the other hand, there is a demand or expenditure for purchasing these goods and services in the market. Both the supply and demand boards must move in tandem. If the supply proceeds slower than demand, prices rise, it leads to inflation. If supply proceeds slower than demand, prices rise, leads to inflation, and if demand falls behind, firms will be left with unsold inventories, which may lead to cuts in future production, and job and income losses, and a worsening cycle of demand and growth slowdown. If demand falls down, firms will be left with unsold inventories, which may lead to cuts in future production, job and income losses, and a worsening cycle of demand and growth slowdown. The demand for aggregate expenditure in an economy comes from four sources. First is private consumption, which is sum of expenditures by all individuals on items such as food, clothing, and mobile phones. Second is private investment, which is amount spent by firms and households on installing new machines and constructing new factories and residences. The demand or aggregate expenditure in economy comes from four sources. First is private consumption, second is private investment, which is amount spent by firms and households on installing new machines and constructing new factories or residences. Third is government expenditure for consumption and investment, and former refers to money spent on day-to-day government operations, including paying salaries of to officers, teachers, doctors, and others attached to public institutions. And fourth is the net exports or imports, minus import of goods and services while engaging in trade with the rest of the world. Among the sources of demand, investment stands out for its ability to create multiplier effect. Among the sources of demand, investment stands out for its ability to create multiplier effect. That is, an increase in investment of 100 could increase in the economy's overall demand on GDP by more than 100, let us say by 125, with a multiplier being 1.25. Consider, for instance, public investment is building a new highway network. The incomes received by workers and firms involved in the road construction project will generate fresh demand in the economy, but that is not all. The highways will trigger the establishment of new shops and create opportunities for new industries, all of which will translate into a much bigger expansion of the aggregate demand. Multiplier effect will depend on the nature of the investment and state of the economy. The multiplier from an investment in a railway line is likely higher in an underdeveloped district than in a region with a well-developed transport network. Compared to the investment multiplier effect arising from increased consumption is much weaker. If incomes increase, consumption expenditures also increase, but the relation does not work strongly enough in the reverse direction. A rise in consumption cannot lift incomes as much in the rest of the economy. Therefore, according to Keynesian economists, consumption is a passive component of aggregate demand. Consumption is a passive component of aggregate demand. In the early 1990s, the per capita incomes of both India and China were almost the same. Both countries were equally poor, with the average income of the Indian or Chinese citizen being approximately 1.5% of the average income of an American. But by 23, China's per capita income has grown to 5 times as high as of the Indian level, 2.4 times as high if the purchasing power differences between the two countries are considered as a proportion of US levels. The per capita incomes of China and India were 15% and 3% respectively in 23. The speedy growth of incomes in China has been led by investment. China's investment rates have been significantly higher than the India's from the 1970s onward. In 1992, China investment as a share of GDP was 39.1% in China compared to 27.4% in India, even though per capita incomes of the two countries were nearly equal. In the early 1990s, the per capita incomes of both India and China were approximately the same. Both countries were equally poor, with the average income of an Indian or Chinese resident being approximately 1.5 times of the average income of an American. Approximately 1.5% of an average income of an American. But by 23, China's per capita income has grown up to 5 times as high as Indian level, 2.4 times as high if purchasing power differences between the two countries are considered. The proportion of US levels per capita income of China and India were 15% and 3% respectively. China's investment rates have been significantly higher than India's from 1970 onwards. In 1992, investment as a share of GDP was 39.1% in India, in China and 27.4% in India, even though the per capita incomes of the two countries were nearly equal. The gap in investment rates between India and China narrowed during the first half of the 2000s, with India's investment rate climbing to 35.8% in 2007. However, the two countries responded The gap in investment rates between India and China narrowed in 2000s, with India's investment rate climbed to 35.8% in 2007. However, the two countries responded to the global financial crisis and its aftermath in starkly different ways. Investment rate took a big hit in India, especially after 2012. However, China battled its economic challenges with considerable expenditure, primarily through its state-owned enterprises. In areas of infrastructure, advanced manufacturing, renewable energy, and artificial intelligence, by 2013, the investment rate rose to 44.45% in China, but dropped to 31.3% in India. By 23, these rates were 41.3% and 30.8% for China and India. India's economic growth over the last decade has been driven mainly by expanding domestic consumption expenditure. In 2023, consumption as a share of GDP was 60.3% as compared to 39.1% in China. The dominance of consumption in India's GDP structure is mainly due to weaknesses of its other components of aggregate demand in the country. The shares of investment and government consumption expenditure are relatively low. India has a trade deficit with its import of goods and services being larger than exports, reducing domestic demand. Economic growth driven by consumption is not only slower than investment-led growth, but it also aggravates inequalities. Economic growth driven by consumption not only slower than investment-led growth, but it also aggravates inequalities. The growth of jobs, income, and consumption has remained depressed for many Indians, and they will be left behind. There has been stagnation in the growth of investment and by the public and private corporate sectors in India. It is too early to say if the marginal improvement in investment in 2022-23 is here to stay. The only segment that has shown some vitality is household investments, especially in residential buildings, and that too during the early 2000s. The continued reluctance of private capitalists to spend more in economy is a sign of the sagging animal spirits. In times like these, the government needs to step in with its investments, particularly in the critical sectors, to boost private sector confidence and help spread the benefits of growth to broader population. However, the growth has not shown its resolve, including in latest union budget, to provide an investment boost in the Indian economy. Instead, tax concessions and unwillingness to significantly raise government spending indicate a preference for low growth trajectory pulled by the consumption of the middle and upper classes. However, the only segment that has shown some vitality is household investment, especially in residential buildings, and that too in the early 2010s. The continued reluctance of private capitalists to spend more on the economy is a sign of their sagging animal spirits. In times like these, government needs to step in investments, particularly in critical sectors, to boost private sector confidence and help the benefits of growth. Particularly in critical sectors to boost private sector confidence and help benefits of growth to the broader population. However, the government has not shown its resolve, including in the latest union budget, to provide an investment boost to the Indian economy. Instead, tax concessions and the unwillingness to significantly raise government spending indicate a preference for low growth trajectory pulled by the consumption of middle and upper classes. Is there a right to take offense? The popular YouTube show India's Got Latent has sparked controversies among after criminal proceedings were initiated against its creators and participants who were allegedly obscene remarks in one of its episodes. On February 18, the Supreme Court granted interim protection from arrest to the podcaster Ranveer Al-Habadia, one of the participants named in the FIRs. This has reignited the debate on whether stringent criminal sanctions are justified for the contention speech. Is there a right to take offense? Justice Gautam Patel and Dushyant Dave discusses the question in conversation moderated by Aratika Bhaumik. Just as Gautam Patel, no such right exists, the reasonable restrictions on free speech under Article 19, Clause 2 of the Constitution do not recognize offensive speech as a distinct category. Instead, restrictions are narrowly defined, defined and include security of the state, public order, decency, morality, and other specific grounds. Security of state, public order, decency, morality. Security of state, public order. No such right exists. The reasonable restrictions on free speech under Article 19 to Clause 2 of the Constitution do not recognize offensive speech as a distinct category. Instead, the restrictions are narrowly defined, including security of state, public order, decency, morality, and others. Therefore, the notion of right to take offense lies beyond the ambit of constitutionally permissible limitations. While the language used in the show is highly objectionable and unpalatable, it does not necessarily amount to violation of decency or morality under 19 Clause 2. The right to free speech is always subjected to certain exceptions, including decency and morality. However, these standards vary across jurisdictions and evolve over time. While I agree that the language used in the show was highly inappropriate, I have serious reservations about whether it meets the legal threshold to constitute a criminal offense. In reality, such language is widely used in everyday discourse and has become common parlance in society. Thus, the outrage surrounding it seems misplaced. The right to free speech is always subject to certain exceptions, including decency and morality. However, these standards vary across jurisdiction and evolve over time. While I agree that language used in the show was highly inappropriate, I have serious reservations about whether it meets legal threshold to constitute a criminal offense. In reality, such language is widely used in everyday discourse and has become common parlance in society. The outrage seems misplaced. Should laws be paternalistic or restrict speech only when it poses imminent risk of public disorder? I believe that speech should remain unrestricted except when it is seditious and incites violence. I believe speech should remain unrestricted. I believe speech should remain unrestricted except when it is seditious and incites violence. Constituent Assembly debates reveal strong opposition to restrictions imposed on free speech under Article 19, Clause 2 to 19, Clause 6, with many members arguing that government should have the power to curtail expression. However, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar maintained that in the larger interest of the nation, some restrictions were necessary as long as they remain narrowly defined. However, the irony is that politicians routinely engage in hate speech, yet constitutional authorities fail to take any action. Given this, I would rather grant citizens greater latitude to express themselves than condone such reprehensible conduct for our political leaders. The freedom of speech under 19 Clause 1, Subclause A can be restricted only by limitations explicitly prescribed in Article 19, Clause 2. While the right to free speech is expansive, restrictions remain narrowly defined. Therefore, state cannot impose restrictions beyond these constitutional limits. More importantly, speech cannot be curtailed through executive action. Such restrictions must be imposed solely through duly enacted legislation. Constitutional morality upholds the spirit of the Constitution by reinforcing values like social justice and equality. However, restrictions on free speech are governed by statute law. Any evaluation of whether speech constitutes an offense must be confined to these narrowly defined legal parameters rather than shifting moral sentiments of the public. That said, society has every right to condemn the remarks on the show. It can express discontent through criticism or boycotts. However, criminal sanctions are never the solution. Moreover, the increasing trend of filing multiple FIRs for the same offense constitutes harassment. It not only prejudices the accused but also undermines their right to fair defense. Constitutional morality upholds the spirit of the Constitution by reinforcing values like social justice and equality. Constitutional morality is nuanced and evolving concept. It is not an inherent sentiment, but that must be cultivated. Nuanced and evolving concept. It is not an inherent sentiment, but that must be cultivated. Constitutional morality is not an inherent sentiment, but that must be cultivated. There is also ambiguity regarding its application to the constitutional process. For example, Ambedkar believed it was wiser to entrust the legislature with prescribing forms of administration rather than embedding them in constitution. Rather, that said, I agree whatever a form of speech qualifies as an offense is a matter strictly governed by substantive law. Can profane speech necessarily be considered obscene speech? A speech laced with profanity is not necessarily obscene. This understanding has evolved over 5 decades of judicial interpretation. In 1964, Supreme Court in Ranjit D. Udeshi vs. State of Maharashtra applied a Victorian-era Hicklin test to ban ladies' charity letters by D.H. Lawrence. Supreme Court in Ranjit Udeshi vs. State of Maharashtra applied Hicklin test to ban Charlotte's letter by D.H. Lawrence. It defined obscenity as anything with a tendency to deprave and corrupt, those susceptible to immoral offences. 50 years in a week, Sarkar vs. State of Bengal. Court embraced the community standards test. Court embraced the community standards test. A more contemporary approach, however, community standards are amorphous and hard to define. Does it mean that discussions about sex in public discourse must be prohibited? If so, what does that imply for our ancient art and sculptures? Those standards continue to evolve. Today, few would deem Lady Charlottie's lover obscene rather than literary masterpiece. Obscenity is not explicitly defined in the Criminal Law Information Technology Act 2000. Instead, its determination is a matter of degree, shaped by society's evolving moral standards. Look at the erotic art of Khajuraho and Konark. It seems that rather than becoming more progressive, our society has regressed over time. Justice Krishna Iyer captured this dilemma in Raj Kapoor and Others vs. State, where court quashed criminal proceedings against the makers of the film Satyam Sundaram. He observed the relation between reality and relativity must haunt the court's evaluation of obscenity expressed in society's pervasive humanity and not law's penal perspective. The relation between reality and relativity must haunt the court's evaluation of obscenity expressed in society's pervasive humanity, not law's penal perspective. A recent study by the research group India Hate Lab found 74.4% surge in hate speech against minority by politicians in 24. Is the relentless targeting of comedians a case of misplaced priority? Yes, definitely. Politicians continue to spew hate with impunity. During the Lok Sabha elections, several politicians, including the Prime Minister, made blatant divisive remarks against minorities, yet the Election Commission and the state police remained silent spectators. Opposition parties also failed to challenge these violations in court. Meanwhile, mainstream television journalists amplify hate speech daily. This should alarm every member of society. Comedians are targeted across political lines because they expose uncomfortable truths. Politicians perceive them as a threat, but dissent and criticism are fundamental to democracy. Silencing them paves the way for authoritarianism. Comedians play a crucial role in society by challenging authority and reflecting societal realities. I believe in the legal maxim "in joko veritas, in jest there is truth." Thus, the targeting of comedians is not just unfortunate but reprehensible. However, the profanity is not humor, it is an indication of thoughtlessness. Profanity is not humor, it is an indication of thoughtlessness. Intelligent humor does not require offensive language. As a society, we must understand that divergent views are inevitable. We can either engage with them or ignore them, but not silence the messenger. I also agree with Dushyant that we are failing to penalize rising instances of hate speech. Efforts to regulate digital content, such as Broadcasting Services Regulation Bill, have intensified. Broadcasting Services Regulation Bill. I do not endorse any such regulatory uh, attempts. Once free speech is restricted, it sets a dangerous precedent. Censorship creates uniformity, compelling everyone to consume the same sanitized information, but the essence of free speech is to prevent such conformity. In democracy, divergent opinions are essential, otherwise, we'll risk sliding to authoritarianism. My concern is what the selective enforcement of laws. Why do censorship laws primarily target opposition leaders and government critics? People are dragged to court for merely criticizing the government, even when their speech falls short of sedition. Laws must be applied fairly and impartially, as something the judiciary is failing to uphold. A vibrant democracy demands unwavering protection of free speech. Even as authorities went slow and confused in confusing facts, with journalists, the postmortems were conducted quickly. The long and winding road of India-China relations. India's Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri was in China in January 25, during which India and China made several announcements on the future of their bilateral relations. He made Wang Yi, who is China's foreign minister, the director of Office of Central Commission of Foreign Affairs, and also Politburo member of the party, and also Liu Jianchao, Minister of International Department of the Chinese Communist Party. The Indian statement after the meeting indicated that the process of restoration of several aspects of bilateral relations, including media and think tank exchanges, Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, bilateral to several including media and think tank exchanges, Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, and bilateral flights is on cards for the summer 25. India and China have attempted to move forward after more than 4 years of tense and stalemate-based relations since the clash in Galwan in 2020. Stalemates cannot be permanent. Both sides have made their points, and moved to the detente. One can argue that there are several reasons for the timing of this bilateral agreement, the main being the election of Donald Trump, who is known as disruptor and unpredictable in ways of doing business. The other is about economic concerns in China and India in recent time. India and China have been bracing for Trump impact, especially when by the middle of the October last year, this election was already beginning to look more likely to happen. This possibility may have pushed October 24, this de-escalation agreement between India and China, and Mr. Trump's gigantic electoral victory in November have pushed January 25 agreement between India and China. There is historic logic to this as well. China agreed to normalizing relations with India after the 1962 war, only in the backdrop of backlash in the aftermath of 1989 Tiananmen massacre. Again, China may have agreed to normalize its relations with India given that it had to brace for the Trump impact. There is both internal and external logic around restoration of normalcy. However, since we do not know whether patrolling rights have been or are fully restored, whether demobilization is in advanced stages, such an absence of communication on part of the government raises doubts and questions needlessly. The Government of India has maintained absolute silence on the status of de-escalation, demilitarization and demobilization of the fairly large number of troops. Troops were mobilized and deployed on the border first during tensions of May-June 2020 and then in the larger numbers in the aftermath of the June 15, 20 clashes. These troops were on active duty or in newly created barracks close to the 6 points of tension along the border, including Galwan, Dipsang Bulge, Charding Nala, and Gogra Post, and hot spring on the north bank of the Pangong Lake. Galwang, Dipsang Bulge, Galwang, Dipsang Bulge, Charding, Galwang, Bulge, Charding Nala, Galwan, Depsang Bulge, Charding Nala, Ghogra Post and Hot Springs, and on the north bank of Pangong Lake. There is also no clarity. The government in India has maintained absolute silence on the status of de-escalation, demilitarization, and demobilization of the fairly large number of troops. Troops were mobilized and deployed on the border, first during tensions of the May-June 2020, and then even in large numbers in the aftermath of June 2020 clashes. These troops were on active duty or in newly created barracks close to the 6 points of tension along the border, including Galwan, Depsang Bulge, Charding, Charding Nala, Gogra Post, Hot Springs, and on the northern side of the Pangong Lake. There is no clarity on whether the large number of People's Liberation Army troops on the Chinese side before and after the clashes has retreated to their bases. Confirmation of this would mean that actual restoration of normalcy on the line of actual control has been reached. India has also made it clear in aftermath that it was China that had violated several agreements and protocols the two sides had signed. One is not sure about whether these have been rectified in a verifiable way. This in turn can only be established when patrolling rights have not been agreed to but also exercised. The briefing in October 24 by the Foreign Secretary prior to the 16th BRICS summit in Kazan in this respect was already guarded. It only alluded to an agreement that would lead to the process of disengagement and resolution of issues that emerged in 2020. A follow up briefing on this issue would have been useful and necessary to make it clear that India has not given up on its position on the bilateral relations. India's principal stand in dealing with China in the aftermath of 2020 crisis has been that stability on the border and restoration of status quo ante are preconditions to progress in other bilateral relations. India's principal stand in dealing with China in the aftermath of 2020 crisis has been that stability on the border and restoration of status quo ante, stability on the border and the restoration, stability along the border and restoration of status quo ante are preconditions to progress in other aspects of bilateral relations. However, it was China that reiterated that India should move on from the clashes and not let the border standoff be hindrance to the development of the overall bilateral relations in the economic, political, and social sectors. India's silence on the progress of the status of restoration of status quo ante makes it appear as though the Chinese position of moving on is succeeding and that India is abandoning its position of stability and restoration before there is progress on other aspects, it was always known that the process of restoring normalcy would be long drawn and fraught with challenges. In addition, the worldviews of India and China will remain divergent as their ideas about the world order are not going to converge anytime soon. India-China relations have seen several cyclical ups and downs in the Xi Jinping era. Therefore, abundant caution would be best way forward. The Indian government lack of clarity does not boost anyone's confidence. Watering down pollution in Ganga needs long term solutions, not denialism. Official estimates suggest that around 45 crore visitors, nearly a third of India's population, have been to Prayagraj for Mahakumbh Mela, which have been in mid January. With such a massive influx, even a small percent of individuals who carry microbes could trigger extensive chains of disease transmission. The Ganga at Prayagraj, where devotees not only have ritual baths but also drink the water, inevitably becomes the complex receptacle of microbiomes. The CPCB, which is responsible for monitoring and controlling air, water, and land pollution, has been assessing water quality at Prayagraj since the festival began. Its reports, which are publicly accessible, presents a mixed picture. On January 14, which was Makar Sankranti, one of the auspicious bathing days, fecal coliform levels, a key indicator of contamination from human and animal waste, were at high, nearly 11,000 units at the Sangam Ghat, which is more than 4 times of the permissible 2,500 units. At the Old Nani Bridge along the Kamna, the count was even higher at 33,000 units. However, on the other days, these numbers are as low as 270 units. Similar fluctuations were observed for other parameters of the water quality, such as biological oxygen demand and dissolved oxygen. A CPCB report submitted at the NGT on February 3 stated that the water quality on Jan 12-13 was not fit for bathing, let alone drinking, despite bathing having high tolerance limit. However, the report also noted the reduction in organic pollution due to freshwater institution upstream. It further observed that sheer number of people bathing in the river during Mahakumbh Mela, particularly on the auspicious days, led to inevitable spike in fecal contamination. These fluctuations are not exclusive to Kumbh Mela. Routinely monitoring of water quality by the CPCB has consistently recorded similar patterns, reinforcing the fact that regardless of what festival may be, water in the Ganga at Prayagraj is not fit for consumption. Whether as a few drops or bucketful, the river's suitability for bathing fluctuates based on water flow and dilution. Considering these adverse findings, Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath's dismissal of the scientific data as baseless is misleading. The National Mission for Clean Ganga is based on sustained efforts to restore the river's health, and Uttar Pradesh, its largest beneficiary, must prioritize continuous cleanup efforts instead of undermining legitimate pollution concerns. Kumbh Mela highlights the urgent need for long-term solutions, not denialism. Science can come to aid of the faithful. It is in no one's interest to undermine scientific findings in the name of encouraging a spiritual journey. The Rekha Gupta, first-time MLA, has become Chief Minister of Delhi, defying all odds. If I may add, needs comment. The so-called anonymous selection of the leader of the BJP legislature party, which took almost 2 weeks, smacks of the Congress's culture. There was hectic lobbying by over a half dozen aspirants. This is because the Delhi unit of the BJP has several defectors from other political parties. Giant killer Parvesh Verma could not make it, perhaps because of the party's strategic policy to focus on women. Whether this will pay dividends or to the BJP or not, only time will tell. The unity forced by the party's high command should last 5 years, and Ms. Gupta should serve the people of Delhi. If the party's manifesto is not implemented in toto, the people of Delhi might go back to Aam Aadmi Party rather sooner rather than later. Parties with an ideology that differs from that of BJP's have obviously failed to learn important lessons in political management to match the aspirations of younger voters. A lack of dynamism, hard work, and discipline in party management are what marks the political opponents of the BJP. Whatever Donald Trump's second term portends for America, his vow to end the Gaza war came true. Again, the credit of the US and the Russia agreeing to ending the war in Ukraine goes to Mr. Trump. He deserves praise for cessation of the two mindless wars. New line in Delhi, Rekha Gupta should find the governance challenges easy to handle. The BJP appointment of the first time MLA Rekha Gupta as a new Chief Minister of Delhi is in line with the preference for relatively junior and fresh faces in leadership positions. Ms. Gupta has risen through the ranks of the Sangh Parivar and won Delhi University Students' Union and municipal elections before being elected to the assembly from Shalimar Bagh. She has held several positions in the party and frontal organizations. Now interested with the position of Chief Minister, Ms. Gupta has her task cut out. She has to balance community and sectoral interest within the party and command authority over the bureaucracy and balance multiple power centers with the unique and complex governance architecture of Delhi. All levels of the government in Delhi are now under control of the BJP, which might improve governance in the city. Ms. Gupta is the fourth women chief minister of Delhi, second women chief minister of Delhi from the BJP, and the only women among the party's 14 chief ministers across India. A woman in the top post allows BJP to deflect other factional claims in the party and possibly boost its popular image. Ms. Gupta also represents the trader Bania community, which has been the bedrock of BJP's politics in Delhi for decades. The new leader ticks many boxes for the party, and her success depends on how she grows into the challenging role. The BJP has tried to balance caste and community representation in the new Council of Ministers. In Parvez Singh Sahib Verma, the party has found someone to represent the Jat community. In Mahinder Singh Sirsa, the Sikh community. In Aswit Sood, the Punjabi Hindu Sikh community. In Ravinder Indraj Singh, Dalits. In Kapil Mishra, Brahmins. And in Pankaj Kumar Singh, Purvanchali community. The new government has a multitude of governance challenges awaiting it. Problems of air and water pollution are issues that need a solution that go beyond the boundaries of Delhi. Issues such as law and order are under purview of the Union Home Ministry. Ms. Gupta's experience of being the three-term municipal councillor could help, as would the fact that neighbouring Haryana and Uttar Pradesh also have BJP governments. The BJP has returned to power in the national capital after 26 years, have offered the electorate a raft of welfare measures to achieve that. There are issues of unemployment and underemployment, affordable housing, and infrastructure that requires the government's attention. The transformation of Koraput's tribal food basket. Koraput district in Odisha is a beautiful landscape rich in biodiversity and home to predominantly tribal population, but there is also a paradox. There is rampant poverty and undernutrition. There is no dearth of government schemes. They are in the form of direct feeding programs or schemes for livelihood activities, yet undernutrition levels remain high. According to an early estimate based on National Family Health Survey 5 data, 43% of the children under age of 5 are stunted, 33% underweight, 17 are fed adequate diet. Only 17% are fed an adequate diet, more than 50% of the women are anemic. Between 23, the question is, what is that people can do themselves in order to have access to healthier diets and a better environment? Between 2013 and 2022, MS Swaminathan embarked on a community based model of nutrition literacy in order to empower tribal communities to take action in diversifying their household food basket with nutritious foods. The aim was to facilitate a transformative process, the spearheaded by the community to move towards nutrition security, as it is an agricultural population with small and marginal land holdings engaged in subsistence farming. Nutrition sensitive farming approach to maximize and diversify food production was adopted along with sanitation, hygiene, and infant and young child feeding practices. Since transformation begins at an individual level, it was decided to build capacity of a core group of adult men and women through residential training program. The first step was to sensitize the community to its own nutritional status. This involved assessing their nutritional status of women, children, adolescent boys and girls by taking their height and weight, consolidating secondary data and presenting them to the community. After subsequent discussions, villages agreed to select a few men and women from every village representing various caste groups to undergo residential training programs on key nutrition concepts such as balanced diets, IYCF infant and young child feeding practices, and the role of dietary diversity and sanitation and hygiene. Enabling nutrition sensitive and agriculture that included crop diversity, backyard and poultry, and wherever possible, pisciculture. A few resident training programs, each about 2.5 days long, were held at periodic intervals in 6 months. These were activity based and included group work, discussions, role plays, followed by an analysis of the situation and possible solutions. The approach was to engage participants in a dialogue to discuss theoretical aspects from the perspective of their own knowledge rooted in social, cultural, economic, and political context. Participants discussed how caste, class, and gender dimensions affected nutrition security of different family members at the household level. They compared the new learning with their existing knowledge and were satisfied when the sum of the existing knowledge was reiterated. The perception of dietary diversity was based on the dish count rather than the food group count. As one participant remarked, we never thought about having both dal and vegetables in the everyday diet so long there was so long As one was there accompanied to meant through rice, we were satisfied. They were happy to know that they were custodians of a variety of traditional varieties. A few residential training programs, each of 2.5 day long, were held at periodic intervals of 6 months. Approach was to engage participants to discuss theoretical aspects from perspective rooted in their own context. Participants discussed how caste gender affected nutrition security. While social spaces are usually hierarchically defined, residential training gave them an opportunity to engage with people from other villages and with both genders. They planned how could introduce and cultivate more nutritious crops on different types of land, explored advantages of collective decision making rather than individual efforts, and message and songs were created and composed by participants on various themes such as balanced diet, dietary diversity, hygiene, sanitation, and support to women. While they were aware of the few government entitlements, they were eager to learn many more. More than 200 men and women from over 70 villages were trained in the residential training programs, becoming the community champions in transforming themselves and their communities. They identified further training needs, mainly to improve agricultural production, covering seed treatment, vermicompost use, the use of organic fertilizers, mushroom production, post harvest technology, and value addition. These training programs were organized in the villages. Over 10 years, about 1,000 men and women were trained in various aspects of agriculture, animal husbandry, and pisciculture, such as community resource base for nutrition security was created to address underlying issues of undernutrition through household nutrition security. The community champions shared various health and nutrition messages with their families, friends, and fellow villagers when engaged in agricultural work, on their way to the market, in women's self-help group meetings, or while at tea shop, or even during festival events. They also convened village meetings to discuss creating hunger-free villages. They led by example. They undertook a range of activities both individually and collectively. Those who had a plant began cultivating a variety of crops. Most of them started growing more vegetables and fruits. Home gardens were revived and diversity of crops increased from about 4 crops at the beginning of the program to 9 crops at the time of the cultivation. One women champion got her land back from the lease in order to resume agricultural activities. Another who was landless took a piece of land on to grow few crops. Another landless woman began growing vegetables using the foundation of the house she was constructing. Paddy fields that had been kept fallow after the harvest were now used for pulse cultivation, making use for residual moisture. Diversity in crop production was seen in Mothpera and Deragida, names changed, panchayats in the Boiparida block. While earlier 71% of them were cultivating 2 or 3 varieties of crop, more than 60%, 4 to 5 varieties, around 90% had operational home gardens. Towards the end, in more than 50% of the household, home gardens were operational for more than 7 to 9 months. From sowing varieties of crops, 4 varieties, household began 9 to 11 varieties. Some prepared biocompost used it for their home gardens. Women champions worked closely with accredited social health activists and Anganwadi workers to spread nutrition messages. Villagers also monitored the direct feeding program under the ICDS in Licha Namechand village. There was no Anganwadi center. The village community champions organized village meetings and spoke about the need for one. The villagers passed a resolution for a sanction of an Anganwadi in the village, and male champions followed this up with the block office till the center was sanctioned. They supervised building construction and upon completion organized an inauguration. They also revived defunct village structures for nutrition security such as community grain bank, discussed their village situation in Gram Sabha village council meetings, and developed an overall plan for hunger-free villages. How prison dramas explore the human condition, no other setting lends more nuanced cinematic takes on human condition as much as prisons do, as countless films and shows have shown reflected on. Most prisons seem far removed from the rehabilitative purpose. Election Commissioner became three-member body from 1993. This mathematician Sukumar Sen, the distinction V.S. Ramadevi's tenure holds. She held the shortest tenure as election commissioner with 16 days. Nota option was introduced. V.S. Sampath, person who served CEC for the longest. Kalyan Sundaram, bureaucrat who credited with reforming TN session. Manipur has been in the news for political turmoil, but here's a quiz on some prominent people from one of the India's most important border states. Name this feminist social movement, also known as Guardians of Civil Society, which has played a major role in fighting against drug abuse, alcoholism, crime against women, and against the AFSPA. What does the name of this movement mean? One of the India's outstanding boxers, this athlete who was also part of the Indian Navy and won gold medal in the bantamweight category of the 1998 Asian Games in Bangkok. Name him. Padma Shri awardee when the Major Dhyanchand Khel Ratna Award winner. The weightlifter won silver medal at the Tokyo Olympics in 2020. Considered a leading exponent of the India's classical dance form of Manipuri, the artist was awarded Padma Shri in 1986 and the Sangeet Natak Academy Fellowship awarded by the National Academy for Music. The Chief Minister of the state for the longest period, 15 years. Surrender looted arms in 7 days or face action, says Manipur Governor. Ajay Kumar Bhalla emphasizes the need for peace and urges all communities to work towards restoring normalcy in the state. In a statement, said people of Manipur, both in valley and hills, have suffered immense hardship for the 20 months. He said, it is in the greatest interest of restoring normalcy. All communities and state must come towards ensuring cessation of hostilities. It is in this regard that I sincerely request, particularly the youth, to voluntarily come forward and surrender looted and illegally held weapons and ammunition to the nearest police station. With effect from today, your single act of returning these weapons can be a powerful gesture to ensuring peace. I want to assure that no punitive action will be initiated if such weapons are returned within the stipulated time. Therefore, strict action will be taken. Amit Shah appeals Northeast insurgents to join mainstream. Supreme Court stays Lokpal order on powers over High Court judges. Sri Lankan Navy arrests 10 fishermen from Rameshwaram, impounds 3 traveller. Initial probe points at a triple murder in Kolkata family case. Sugar exports helped in clearing arrears. Barely a month after Centre's decision to allow the export of 10 lakh tons of sugar, the Indian Sugar and Biomanufacturers Association has claimed that almost 21,000 crore of arrears due to sugar and cane farmers have been paid, terming the opening up of sugar export as a wonderful decision. ISMS Director General Deepak Balani said foreign exchange that sugar millers had received is being used to clear the arrears. Ministry of Defence signs to contrast worth one 1900 crore for the procurement of software-defined radios and Indian Coast Guard for the Indian Coast Guard and rough terrain forklift trucks. Rekha Gupta takes as the ninth chief minister. Trump deal possible with China. Trump. Delhi cabinet decides to implement Ayushman Bharat. Stable CAG reports. Government prioritizing PR false ads over national security. Congress seeks white paper on USAID funds. IB Ministry warns OTTs against obscene content. Ministry cites complaints from the general public. Ensure age-based clarification, aged grading for mature content. Legal framework is Indecent Representation of Women Prohibition Act, IT Act prohibiting obscene digital content, IT rules for streaming platform, Bharati Nyaya Samhita expands content regulation, aspirant from India abroad register for video games contest, handheld video game design challenge organized by the Indian Digital Gaming Society under the World Audio Visual Summit, NHRC issues Bengal government to a death of two workers. Pilots could get weekly off for 48 hours from July 1 DGCA audit. Key provisions of the DPDP Act infantilizes persons with disabilities. Government panel calls KIIT's founder over student unrest. Sri Lanka not seeking to renegotiate in power deal with Adani Green. IKEA braces for India's new furniture rules amid supply chain challenges. Britain, France propose European reassurance for Ukraine. 30,000 troops to protect Ukraine. Train in Sri Lanka runs over 6 elephants. No passengers hurt. Top Republican right-winger McConnell to leave Senate in 2026. Israel grieves as Hamas turns over the bodies of four Gaza hostages. US government should take over Washington, says Trump. Bangladesh security forces kill two men in crackdown, sparring rights concerns. Indians are born clever, but they should be ready to suffer. Childhood cancers account for 4% of cancer cases. This leaves thousands of children vulnerable to the financial toll of cancer. Education is the pathway of economic empowerment for children. When a child or parent is diagnosed with cancer, families are often forced to pull children out of schools while older siblings take on caregiving or start working. AI powered tools generate real time insights into antibiotic resistance. Supreme Court stays Lokpal order on power over High Court judges. Supreme Court judges are public servants under the Prevention of Corruption Act but are not public servants under the Lokpal Act. The Supreme Court was established by the Constitution. The High Courts pre-existed the Constitution and are only recognized by it. The judge of a high court established by an act of parliament will come within the ambit of the expression any person in section 14 of the Lokpal Act. There is a precondition to consult the Chief Justice of India before initiating section 20 Lokpal Act, a preliminary inquiry into complaint lodged against the High Court judge. Rekha Gupta, 9th Chief Minister, UP government eyes with infrastructure boost with 8 lakh crore budget. 0.9 lakh crore budget. Microsoft unveils a new quantum chip, Majorana. Majorana 1. Trade deal possible with China, Trump. Non-BJP ruled states in South India opposed UGC proposed guidelines. Infiltration has gone down substantially after change of the Bangladesh regime. So that's all in this one. See you in the next.